Imagine this. You're 8 years old, just leaving a movie with your parents. You're excited, acting out the best parts of the movie, while your parents smile at you. You're happy. You're all walking home, through a quiet alley, the kind you've taken 100 times before. There's laughter, the night feels safe. Until it doesn't. A man steps out of the shadows. He wants your mother's pearls. Your father tries to protect her. 2 shots. Just 2. And suddenly, you're alone. Kneeling in blood, staring at 2 bodies that will never move again.
Could you stay with me? I'm scared.
Would you ever move on? And even if you do, will you ever be anything but okay? Would it haunt your dreams, shape every decision you make? Would it change not just who you are, but who you have to become? This is the story of a child who never truly grew up. A man trapped in the echo of a single night. Today we're asking, does Batman have PTSD? And more so, what happens when trauma isn't just part of your past, but it becomes who you are? In this video, we're going to look at how PTSD actually works in the brain and how grief, fear, and justice have turned Bruce Wayne into Gotham's most complex survivor. Because this story is not just about Batman, it's about all of us. Everyone who's ever tried to make sense of the darkness. Before we begin, please note that while this video explores psychological concepts and diagnoses, I'm not a licensed psychologist or mental health professional. This content is intended for your entertainment, some educational, and mainly for discussion purposes only. If you or someone you know is struggling with trauma or PTSD, please reach out to a qualified mental health provider. Before we can answer if Batman has PTSD, we need to understand what PTSD actually looks like. It's estimated that 1 in 11 people will be diagnosed with PTSD in their lifetime. And it doesn't always come from war zones. Sometimes it starts in your own home or your own mind. Think of Laurie Strode from Halloween. She's just not paranoid. She's living in constant fear, flashbacks, isolation, and survival, mostly due to the attacks from Michael Myers. For those that don't know, Halloween is a movie released in 1978 by director John Carpenter that started the trend of slashers that led to Jason, Freddy Krueger, and Chucky. So why in this video about Batman am I talking about Laurie Strode? Well, the answer to that is because I love horror and I think it's a genre that emphasizes this better than most. But the better answer is that Laurie in almost all her appearances gives us a clear representation of what PTSD is in a more digestible way. PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes, PTSD is due in part to the aftermath of a traumatic event, and was first diagnosed in soldiers in the form of shell shock after their time in the battlefield, but later was seen in everyday people. Perhaps you yourself have experienced something tragic: death of a loved one, an accident, an assault, or act of violence. The first criteria is trauma. This is what we see in Laurie. The most obvious requirement is that the person must experience a traumatic event. She experiences the attack by Michael, the death of her friends, the savage way he invaded the home where she was babysitting, the helplessness she experienced. Criteria number 2, intrusive symptoms. This is where PTSD becomes unrelenting. You're not just remembering what happened, you're reliving it, sometimes without warning. For Laurie Strode, we see this everywhere in the modern sequels, from Halloween H2O to Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills. In H2O, she experiences vivid nightmares and panic attacks, constantly fearing Michael's return. She wakes up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, unable to separate past from present. The attack lives in her, like a recording on repeat. Her trauma isn't in the past, it's present, immediate, and visceral. These are called intrusive symptoms. Recurrent memories, flashbacks, and nightmares so vivid that they feel real. They're not just thoughts, they hijack the senses. And for someone like Laurie, and maybe someone like Bruce, they're often inescapable. Criteria number 3, avoidance symptoms. Now this one's tricky because it's not just physical avoidance, it's emotional. People with PTSD will go out of their way to avoid anything that reminds them of the event, even thoughts and feelings. Laurie refuses to go near the neighborhood. She won't talk about what happened unless she's in survival mode. She won't engage with her family, who've moved on, because to her the threat never ended. Avoidance is a form of self-protection. But it also isolates you from recovery. In PTSD, avoidance isn't a weakness, it's the brain trying to keep you safe. But in doing so, it often keeps you stuck. So when we talk about Batman, we'll have to ask, is he avoiding trauma or is he doing the exact opposite? Criteria number 4, negative mood and cognition. This is where PTSD begins to dig deep in the way that you think and feel. Not just about trauma, but about yourself, the world, and your future. Laurie exhibits this clearly in both Halloween H2O and Halloween 2018. In H2O, one of the most revealing moments is her emotional outburst towards her son John, a raw explosion of fear, guilt, and desperation.
Right there. What the fuck do you think you're doing?
Mom, I'm really uncomfortable with you saying that
Well,
word.
then don't put me in the position, John. Do you know what day it is?
She lashes out not because he did anything wrong necessarily, but because the idea of losing him terrifies her. It's not just about control, it's about that deep psychological wound she hasn't processed. She isolates herself not only just physically, but emotionally. She expresses guilt for surviving, shame about her parenting, and a deep lingering belief that the world is no longer safe. Her identity becomes locked in that night. She's no longer a person who survived the trauma, she becomes a trauma.
I need you to be responsible. Do you know what that means? Responsible.
Don't talk to me about responsible,
I
Mom.
just need this one thing.
Mom, I am not responsible for you! Okay, Mom, I can't live like this. I'm sorry.
What does that mean, John?
If you want to stay handcuffed to your dead brother, that's fine, but you're not dragging me along. Not anymore.
These symptoms include distorted beliefs about oneself or others, persistent fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. It can also mean feeling detached from others and an inability to experience positive emotions. Laurie checks all those boxes. Criteria number 5, altered arousal and reactivity. This is just the fight or flight system stuck in the on position. People with PTSD often experience irritability, anger outbursts, reckless behavior, trouble concentrating, hypervigilance, and an exaggerated, startled response. In Halloween 2018, Laurie is constantly checking locks, running drills, practicing with firearms. She startles easily. She drinks to self-soothe, and she's always anticipating an attack. Not because she's paranoid, but because her nervous system is conditioned to never feel safe. This is survival mode that never shuts off. And we eventually look at Batman and we'll have to ask, is he calm or just always ready for action? Criteria number 6, duration of symptoms. This is probably the simplest one. PTSD doesn't settle in overnight. For it to be diagnosed, the symptoms have to last much longer than a month. In Laurie's case and in many real cases, it's not just a month, it's years, even decades. In H2O, we're 20 years after the original trauma, and Laurie is still experiencing panic attacks, nightmares, and emotional instability. In Halloween 2018, it's 40 years later, and she still sleeps with a weapon by her bed. The trauma didn't fade, it's embedded. This confirms what we're seeing isn't just grief, but persistent psychological trauma. Criteria number 7, functional impairment. PTSD doesn't just hurt, it disrupts. It impairs your ability to live, work, and function. Laurie has difficulty maintaining relationships, has become estranged from her daughter, and struggles with daily life. She can't hold down a job. Her home is a fortress, not a home. She's not just preparing, she's surviving. Her trauma has altered how she interacts with the world, and it's not a past event, it's her present reality. Criteria number 8. Finally, PTSD must be distinguishable from the effects of drugs, alcohol, or other medical conditions. While Laurie does drink in Halloween 2018, sometimes heavily, her behavior, flashbacks, hypervigilance, and isolation existed before the drinking. The alcohol isn't the cause of her trauma response, it's a coping mechanism. And that distinction matters. Laurie's case across multiple timelines and reboots shows a consistent arc of PTSD expression. PTSD in itself is already complex, but complex PTSD takes everything deeper. Where PTSD is often rooted in a single traumatic event, complex PTSD comes from prolonged or repeated trauma, especially in childhood. Think abuse, neglect, captivity, or exposure to chronic violence. It doesn't just alter your memory, it alters your identity. Laurie's trauma, while severe, is situational, one night, one attacker. But Bruce lost his parents at 8, and then spent the rest of his life re-exposing himself to violence, grief, and loss. His trauma didn't end in Crime Alley, it just started there. Complex PTSD adds new layers: emotional dysregulation, deep-seated shame, and a shattered sense of self. These aren't It's just symptoms, they're survival strategies. Bruce doesn't just exhibit fear or vigilance, he shows signs of an identity fused with trauma. His mission isn't therapy, it's repetition, it's control. Laurie's story is filled with locks, drills, panic rooms, visual metaphors for a life barricaded against fear. She builds walls because she doesn't feel safe. Batman does the same. The Batcave is a fortress beneath a mansion. His suit, armor, literally forged from fear. His gadgets, his tactics, his silence, they're all part of a system designed to make sure he's never vulnerable again. Laurie sleeps with a gun under her pillow. Bruce patrols the streets every night. Laurie pushes her daughter to protect her. Bruce trains children to fight so they never feel helpless the way he did. Both of them are building around their trauma, not beyond it. One hides in security, the other one lives in a constant state of war. So now that we know what PTSD is, not just in theory, but through someone like Laurie Strode, we've built a clearer, more grounded understanding of what PTSD actually looks like. But before we ask whether Bruce Wayne meets these same criteria, we need to take a step back to where it all began. Because PTSD doesn't start with symptoms, it starts with trauma. And for Batman, that trauma started in Crime Alley. What happens when the worst night of your life becomes the foundation of your identity? Trauma isn't just about something bad that happens. It's easy to call an event traumatic, but bad things happen all the time. That's a sad reality of our world. But what you may deem as traumatic, others may see as an everyday occurrence. Things like public speaking can be detrimental to some, and to others they thrive in it. Perspective, cultural background, personal ethics, and morality all tie into how you may perceive an event to be traumatic. Perception. That's the key word here, because it's how you personally perceive an event which leads to your brain's response to it. And to be clear, not everyone who experiences trauma develops PTSD. To better understand this, I want to explore the trauma of 3 characters, including Batman himself, exploring how the same or similar trauma affects different people. Let's look at 3 of the most iconic heroes in pop culture. Batman, like I said before, Superman, and Spider-Man, and how trauma shaped who they became. Bruce Wayne saw his parents murdered right in front of him as a child. It wasn't just loss, it was violent, sudden, and deeply personal. His trauma comes from helplessness, from being too small to stop the worst moment of his life. From that night on, Bruce isn't just mourning, he's rebuilding, and not just his life, but the entire world around him. His trauma becomes ritualized, structured, and transformed into a mission, but it's never resolved, it's relived every night in a cape and a cowl. Clark Kent, meanwhile, also lost his parents, his entire planet actually, but he was a baby when Krypton was destroyed. He didn't witness the death, he grew up in a small town, loved by Jonathan and Martha Kent. His trauma is more abstract, it's a trauma of identity, of never fully belonging. He processes his pain through gratitude, through connection, through service.
I have fought hard over the years to earn your trust, and
His powers don't isolate him, they burden him with purpose. Peter Parker's trauma is rooted in guilt. He could have stopped the thief who killed Uncle Ben, and he didn't. Unlike Bruce, Peter wasn't powerless, he was careless, and he never forgives himself.
Losing Uncle Ben was my fault, because I didn't do what was right. It won't happen again.
His trauma isn't about loss alone, it's about failure. And so Peter becomes a hero not only to control his pain, like Bruce, or to serve like Clark, but to make up for what he didn't do, and to follow his uncle's lead that with great power comes great responsibility. 3 orphans, 3 traumas, but 3 completely different identities shaped by how they perceived and internalized what happened to them. To understand this better, we need to look at something called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs for short. These are highly stressful or traumatic events that occur during childhood, like abuse, neglect, witnessing domestic violence, or losing a parent. They don't always involve a single dramatic event. Sometimes it's a slow daily grind of instability that rewires how the brain develops. The ACEs studies, first conducted by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, found that the more ACEs a person has, the greater their risk for long-term mental health issues, substance abuse, chronic illness, and even early death. It turns out childhood trauma doesn't just stay in your past, it shapes your nervous system, your perception of safety, your ability to connect with others, and it follows you into adulthood in ways you might not even realize. And this isn't just something you see in comic books. Take Eleven from Stranger Things. A child raised in a lab, Exposed to experiments, separated from love, safety, and stability, she didn't just experience one traumatic event, she lived in trauma. That kind of repeated developmental adversity rewired her sense of trust, identity, and fear. She develops intense reactions to danger, struggles to form relationships, and often copes through withdrawal or explosive power. Sound familiar? It is, because it mirrors what we see in Bruce Wayne. Because trauma doesn't look the same in everyone, but it echoes across stories, real or fictional. Bruce Wayne, his parents were murdered in front of him. That alone qualifies as a major ace, but his life after that, filled with isolation, constant exposure to violence, and an endless mission, compounds it. He's not just a case of trauma, he's a case of chronic, compounding adversity. Understanding aces helps us to see that Batman's pain isn't just emotional, it's neurological. And that's why the question of PTSD isn't just, did he suffer? It's how did that suffering shape everything that came next? When the brain is exposed to intense or prolonged stress at a young age, it adjusts how it reacts to danger, processes emotion, and builds relationship. This is especially true for individuals with multiple ACEs. They're more likely to experience chronic anxiety, depression, difficulty trusting others, emotional dysregulation, and even physical health issues later in life. With Bruce Wayne, we see this clearly. His heightened alertness, his need for control, his emotional distance, all of this reflects a nervous system trained to expect danger. He doesn't just remember that night in Crime Alley, he operates as though it could happen again at any moment. Where Bruce builds barriers, Clark opens doors. Superman's response to trauma, being sent away from Krypton, growing up as an outsider, isn't fear but empathy. He doesn't live in anticipation of the worst, he believes in the best. His childhood, while shadowed by loss, was filled with love and moral grounding that gave him the space to develop trust, emotional openness, and a stable sense of self. Clark doesn't train to fight, he lives to help. Peter Parker's trajectory lands somewhere in the middle. Like Bruce, Peter is shaped by a defining moment, Uncle Ben's death. But Peter's trauma is laced with guilt, not helplessness. He wasn't too small to act, he chose not to, and he spent every day since trying to make up for it. But unlike Bruce, Peter stays connected. He jokes, he loves, he mourns openly. His trauma motivates him, but it doesn't consume him. Bruce, by contract, turns every relationship into strategy. Every friend becomes a potential liability. Every emotion gets filtered through control. He doesn't just fight crime, he fights vulnerability. So now that we've broken down trauma, not just what it is, but how it affects identity, relationships, and behavior, and we also have an understanding of PTSD symptoms, we can finally turn back to the question that brought us here in the first place. Let's take everything we know about PTSD and finally shift the lens to Bruce himself. Again, I do want to mention that I am no expert. For reference, I do have an academic background in research with a master's in history. I say this as I am fairly confident that the technical information provided is accurate to the research I obtained, but as it relates to Batman, it is my interpretation of the material, as I am just a dude making videos on YouTube about comic book characters. For someone to have PTSD, that person must meet all the criteria we explored in the earlier section. Exposure to trauma. To be diagnosed with PTSD, the first box that needs to be checked is exposure to trauma. That can mean directly experiencing it, witnessing it happening to someone else, or learning that it happened to someone close to you, especially in a violent or life-threatening way. For Bruce Wayne, this isn't subtle, it's foundational. At 8 years old, Bruce didn't just experience trauma, he witnessed the murder of both his parents, inches from his face. It was sudden, violent, and intimate. He wasn't injured physically, but emotionally, that moment shattered his world. This wasn't a trauma that was processed, it was burned in. Bruce saw the world turn dangerous in a split second, and that single moment became the lens through which he views everything else. It's not just a tragic memory, it's the inciting mark of his entire identity. So yes, Bruce absolutely meets this. Criteria number 2, intrusive symptoms. These are the symptoms that show up uninvited, in your dreams, in your thoughts, in the middle of your day, including flashbacks, nightmares, and recurring memories so vivid that they feel like you're right back in the moment. With Bruce, we've seen it across comics, films, and animated series. The moment in Crime Alley plays on a loop in his mind. He returns there every year on the anniversary. That's not tradition, it's ritualistic. In Batman Mask of the Phantasm, Batman breaks down in front of his parents' grave. In The Batman, We see a man who can barely hold eye contact, lost in his own haunted silence. In countless comics, Year One, The Long Halloween, Hush, the murders of Thomas and Martha aren't just memories, they're internalized events that inform every decision he makes. These aren't passive thoughts, they're persistent. And when your trauma shapes the way you move through the world on a daily basis, that's not background noise, that's intrusion. So yes, he meets this criteria. Criteria number 3, avoidance in PTSD doesn't mean steering clear of places or people, it also means avoiding thoughts, emotions, conversations, anything that might trigger the pain of trauma. Here's where Bruce Wayne stands apart, because while many trauma survivors avoid what hurts, Bruce runs straight towards it. He just doesn't revisit the trauma in Crime Alley, he normalizes it. He just doesn't remember what happened, he rebuilds his life around it. He trains in combat, builds a cave under his childhood home, dons a costume based on his deepest fear, then spends every night hunting the thing that broke him. In clinical terms, that's called counterphobic behavior, confronting the fear instead of retreating from it. And while it might sound brave, it's also a red flag for unresolved trauma. So, does Batman meet the avoidance criteria? No, but that's not because he's healed, it's because his coping mechanism is to re-immerse himself in the trauma every single night. The next one, functional impairment. This is where things get complicated. PTSD must impair a person's ability to function, socially, occupationally, or in daily life. As Batman, Bruce is highly functional. He leads, he plans, he fights, he saves lives. From the outside, he's operating at an elite level, but as Bruce Wayne, that's where the fractures show. He avoids emotional intimacy, he struggles with vulnerability, his personal relationships are shallow and strained. The public identity is a mask, not a life. So does he meet this criteria? Arguably, yes, but also no. His trauma may not impair his ability to be Batman, but it absolutely impairs his ability to be the real Bruce Wayne. This brings us to something else. This is where things get especially nuanced. Some trauma survivors appear perfectly fine, high achieving, disciplined, focused. They show up to work, lead teams, meet every deadline, but inside, they're still living in survival mode. This is sometimes called high functioning or mass PTSD, and Bruce Wayne is a classic example. He doesn't fall apart, he doesn't disappear, but he also doesn't heal. Instead, he builds systems, habits, and strategies to control his inner chaos. Every contingency plan, every patrol, every emotional wall, it's not just strategy, it's structure over suffering. He's not healed, he's just incredibly good at appearing functional. And in that way, that's scarier because it means the trauma never left. It's just that he put on a cape. Criteria number 4, duration. This one is simple. For PTSD to be diagnosed, these symptoms must last more than a month. Bruce's symptoms have lasted his entire life. From the night in Crime Alley to every patrol, every plan, every sleepless night, the trauma never faded. It became his operating system. So yes, he meets this one too, without question. The last criteria is that we have to rule out any other explanations. For PTSD to be diagnosed and confirmed, the symptoms must not be better explained by substance use, medications, or another medical condition. In Bruce's case, we don't see substance abuse, we don't see neurological disorders. His behavior, the hypervigilance, the insomnia, the emotional suppression, all track with trauma, not with another condition. So now that we walked through each of the criteria, what's the final verdict? Bruce Wayne shows symptoms across many of these categories: intrusion, emotional dysregulation, duration, even functional impairment depending on whether you look at Batman or Bruce. The only real deviation is avoidance, and even that may be counterphobia in disguise. So, does Batman have PTSD? Clinically, maybe. He checks most of the boxes, but emotionally, symbolically, what if trauma doesn't hurt you? What if it makes you better?
ダークナイトの心が癒える過去の傷跡への英雄の戦い。
Not everyone who experiences trauma is broken by it. Sometimes trauma doesn't just leave scars, it leaves purpose. Has Batman healed, or just adapted his pain into something functional? There is something we need to look at to further understand the mental state of Batman. While he does not match all of the criteria for PTSD, there's something that he might fit in parallel to it, which is post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth, or PTG, refers to the positive psychological changes that occur as a result of struggling with highly challenging life circumstances. It doesn't mean the trauma disappears, it doesn't mean you're cured, It means you find meaning, not in spite of the trauma, but because of it. This can look like deeper empathy, stronger relationships, renewed purpose, spiritual growth, or a completely redefined identity. It's not healing by returning to who you were, it's healing by becoming something new. For someone like Bruce Wayne, the question becomes, did he simply survive the night in Crime Alley, or did he transform because of it? Did his pain stall him or sculpt him? PTG isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of something powerful growing within it. On the surface, Batman looks like someone who's transformed his pain into purpose. He fights for justice, protects the innocent, and inspires others. That sounds like growth, but when we dig deeper, what we see might not be post-traumatic growth, it might be post-traumatic control. Batman builds systems, he creates rules, he calculates everything. He doesn't just fight crime, he fights uncertainty. The Batcave isn't just a base, it's a bunker. His gadgets aren't just tools, they're safeguards. When he trains others like Robin, is he mentoring them or making sure that they never feel as powerless as he did? When he patrols Gotham, is it about justice or is it about reassuring control over the night that took his parents? Growth suggests forward motion, but Batman circles around the same wound, night after night, not to forget, but to make sure it never happens again. And maybe that's not healing, maybe that's strategy, and maybe that's survival. If Batman represents structure and control, the Bat family represents something closer to connection, or at least the attempt to. Training Robin, Batgirl, or any of his allies could be seen as Batman trying to rebuild what he lost. A family. It's mentorship, but it's also memory work, reimagining a world where he wasn't alone in the alley that night. There's something powerful in that, choosing to bring people into his life to teach them, to protect them, even if it's within the strict rules of his trauma. This shows he hasn't given up on human connections completely. Dick Grayson grows, Barbara heals, Tim studies, and Damian learns. Maybe Batman doesn't heal, but he creates a space where others can, and maybe that's a kind of growth too. Take John Walsh.
Hey kids, I'm John Walsh from America's Most Wanted with some Halloween tips to make sure no one plays tricks with your treats.
The father of Adam Walsh, a young boy who was abducted and murdered in 1981. It's the kind of tragedy no parent ever expects to experience. But instead of collapsing, John channeled his grief into purpose. He became an advocate for missing children, to help to change national policy, and went on to create America's Most Wanted, a show that would go on to help capture over 1,000 fugitives. Walsh didn't erase the pain, he turned it into momentum. His legacy isn't one of avoidance, it's one of transformation. In many ways, that's the same question we keep asking about Batman. Is this crusade justice, or is it grief weaponized into action? Batman represents resilience, but Bruce Wayne represents repression. That's the core tension at the heart of the character. The Bat is strong, focused, untouchable, but Bruce is the part he hides, the part that flinches in the dark, the part that never left that alley. He's built a myth around his trauma, but he rarely engages with it as Bruce. His personal life is fragmented, often hollow. He has allies, but keeps them at a distance. He leads with logic, not vulnerability. And that's what makes Bruce so compelling. He's not just a symbol of hope or vengeance, he's a man caught between healing and holding on. The mission gives him control, the mask gives him clarity, but neither truly bring him peace. The Bat, for example, wasn't just a creature that scared young Bruce, it was a symbol of everything he feared: darkness, vulnerability, helplessness. By choosing the Bat as his emblem, Bruce doesn't just face his fear, he becomes it. He wraps himself in it. The Bat becomes more than a costume. It's a symbol of transformation, not just for Gotham, but for himself. Fear turned into armor. Trauma turned into hope. In myth and storytelling, symbols are meant to hold meaning beyond the literal, and in Bruce's case, the Bat represents a man who refuses to be defined by what broke him. He chooses to redefine it, to give the fear shape so he can control it. Has Batman grown from his trauma, or simply learned to live with it? Perhaps both. Bruce Wayne didn't heal, but found structure, meaning, and a mission. For some, growth becomes resilience, not recovery, and clarity of purpose, not closure. But unfortunately, Bruce has experienced intense trauma later in life despite this armor he built for himself, and this is important to Batman's personal identity. Imagine watching a friend shot down. by a person who did this just to get your attention, or watching a friend fall into madness. Worse yet, seeing your child being down dead in your arms because you were a few moments too late. That's not one tragedy, that's a lifetime of fear burned into memory. Is Batman healing with his family, or hiding inside of it? Let's look at Jason Todd's death. His death wasn't just a loss, it was a rupture, a Robin beaten down and blown apart by the Joker, and a Batman who was too late to stop it. It wasn't just grief, it was failure. Personal, direct, unforgivable. This was the moment Batman's mission stopped being about saving the city and started becoming about controlling it. He became colder, more brutal, more isolated. His guilt didn't just weigh him down, it pushed everyone else away. And when Jason returned as the Red Hood, that guilt was weaponized. Bruce wasn't just facing a resurrected ally, he was facing the consequences of not allowing himself to grieve. Jason's return didn't bring closure, it reopened everything that Bruce had buried under tactics and control. What about Harvey though? Harvey Dent wasn't just Gotham's district's attorney. He was Bruce's friend, his partner, his hope that the city could be saved legally, not just with fist and fear. When Harvey fell, when acid scarred half his face and twisted his mind into Two-Face, Bruce didn't just lose an ally, he lost a symbol. The idea that Gotham could be healed through justice. It crumbled right in front of him, and he blames himself for not seeing it coming, for not saving Harvey in time, for letting another person he cared about fall to the darkness that he fights every night. Harvey's downfall wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning, a reminder that anyone, no matter how good, how noble, can break, and it confirmed Bruce's deepest fear, that maybe he's only ever one step away from becoming the very thing he's sworn to stop. But what about Barbara Gordon? When the Joker shot Barbara Gordon, paralyzing her in The Killing Joke, it wasn't just a physical attack, it was psychological warfare. Bruce wasn't there when it happened, but that didn't stop him from feeling responsible. Barbara wasn't just an ally, she became part of his family, and her injury wasn't the result of a mission gone wrong, a reminder that Batman's enemies don't just hurt him, they hurt the people he loves. Unlike Jason's death, Barbara survived. But survival doesn't mean trauma goes away, it just changes shape. For Barbara, it meant learning to live again. For Bruce, it became another scar, a quiet one, buried beneath the guilt of being too late. He doesn't talk about it, he doesn't dwell, but it's there, and how he hesitates to let others get close, and how tightly he tries to control the chaos, because when the people you care about become collateral, you start treating every connection like a liability. To understand Bruce's relationship with the Bat family, you have to see it for what it is, an attempt to rebuild what was taken from him. He brings in young allies, Dick, Jason, Tim, Damian, not just to fight crime, but to ensure that no one else feels as powerless as he once did. It's mentorship, yes, but it's also projection. He's not just teaching them, he's trying to rewrite the moment in the alley, with a different ending. At its best, the Bat family is a sign that Bruce still believes in people, that despite everything, he hasn't shut the door on connection. He trains, he protects, he passes on legacy. But at its worst, it's a cycle, a reenactment, a trauma passed down through capes and cowls. He pulls them into his war, into his trauma response, and sometimes into his guilt. And when one of them is hurt or lost, it doesn't just break him, it reaffirms his belief that he can never let go. Two places define Bruce Wayne, the alley where he lost everything and the cave where he tries to control it. Crime Alley is a scar, the raw, open wound that shaped his entire worldview. It's where fear and loss first took root. The Batcave is the armor, the shrine, the fortress built not just to fight crime but to protect Bruce from ever feeling that powerless again. In trauma psychology, there's a term called fear memory. It's not just remembering something scary, it's when your brain and body store that fear so deeply that even the smallest reminder can bring it all rushing back. Fear memory lives in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. It's why a smell, a sound, or a shadow can make your heart race even if you're perfectly safe. The trauma doesn't stay in the past, your nervous system keeps it ready just in case. For Bruce, fear memory isn't just neurological, it's architectural. Crime Alley is where it happens. The Batcave is where it lives. His entire mission is structured around the moment his fear memory was born. And that's the Bat family, his attempt to rewrite the memory, to change the ending. But every time he brings someone new into his crusade, he's not escaping the fear, he's reenacting it. The memory never faded, he just built a world around it. Bruce Wayne doesn't run from pain, but he doesn't resolve it either. Instead, he loops it over and over, Every patrol is a reenactment, every training session a simulation. Every young partner he brings into his world is another chance to fix what went wrong. But trauma doesn't heal by repetition, it festers in the ritual. The Batcave is his sanctuary, but also it's his echo chamber. Crime Alley never stays in the past, and neither does Jason or Barbara or Harvey, or the fear that made them. But there is something here, a light at the end of the tunnel. Because while Bruce is stuck in a loop, many of the family aren't. Dick Grayson grew up, he left the cave, he became Nightwing, a hero who carries the pain but doesn't let it define him. Barbara Gordon became Oracle, a symbol of resilience, intellect, and adaptive strength. Her trauma didn't stop her, it reshaped her. Side note, DC later changed this and she can walk again, and whether you like this or feel this is a regression of her character growth, that's up to you. Tim Drake, he found balance. Damian struggles with legacy, but he questions it, something Bruce rarely does. The people around Batman evolve, they change, they challenge the cycle. Bruce, he loops it, while they grow. And that contrast shows us what PTG can look like, and what it looks like when the pain becomes a plan. Maybe Batman built a family to make peace with the past, or maybe he built it to refight again and again. And when your worst memory becomes your mission, what's left of the man who lived it? How does that affect your ethics and your morality? In my Moral Collapse of the Justice League video, I spoke about the way that the Justice Lords were formed, which stemmed from the death of the Flash. In their world, this led to a tyrannical league who controls the world in order to provide a safer place for the people living there at the cost of their personal freedom. This exploration into that world was focused largely on Superman, but I left out Batman to better explore his reaction here. Batman's actions, both good and bad, stem from his own trauma and his determination to prevent that from happening to other people. But why speak about it here? Moral and ethics aren't necessarily defined by a person having PTSD or PTSD-like symptoms. As we mentioned before, Batman does have some of the defining criteria for PTSD, and for the most part, his actions reflect values of what most people would think is good moral standing. No killing, second chances, and no guns. Added to that, this sense that for the most part life is valuable, all parts of it. But depending on how PTSD or trauma affects a person, that reaction can inevitably shift. In one moment in the Justice League episode with the Justice Lords, Batman confronts his Justice Lord self in the Batcave, and there's this deep conversation happening while both are fighting. Through the debate of freedom versus being safe, tyranny versus democracy, Lord Batman states that,
"You grabbed power, and with that power, we've made a world where no 8-year-old boy will ever lose his parents because of some punk with a gun."
Batman drops his batarang and yields, even for just this moment. Later, Batman turns it around on him, but in this moment you can just see how far trauma drives him to double think his moral values. Because that's a terrifying thing about trauma. It doesn't always make you evil, sometimes it makes you efficient. And in Lord Batman, we see a version of Bruce who let fear make the final call. Our Batman walks the same line, but chooses restraint every night, because maybe deep down, he knows how close he is to crossing it. And that leads us to the final question we've been circling around this entire time. Does Batman have PTSD? And the truth is, it's complicated. Bruce Wayne checks many of the clinical boxes: exposure to trauma, intrusive memories, hypervigilance, emotional suppression. He avoids intimacy, relives the same night over and over, and has structured his entire identity around preventing that pain from ever happening again. But PTSD isn't just that. It's a question of functionality. And Batman functions. He leads, he inspires, he saves lives. That doesn't mean he's healed. It doesn't mean he adapted to it. So maybe the better question isn't whether Batman has PTSD. Maybe it's what he's built from it, and whether that structure, that control, that mission is a form of growth or just another kind of scar. Batman isn't just a man responding to trauma, he's a man who has become it. His identity is so deeply intertwined with his pain that separating the two is nearly impossible. The cape, the cowl, the bat symbol, they're not disguises, they're declarations. Every piece of his persona is built from the moment he lost his parents. The bat isn't just a symbol of fear to Gotham criminals, it's Bruce's fear, externalized, worn like an armor. He doesn't run from his trauma, he lives inside of it. He patrols his shadows, he speaks through his silence, and in doing so, he becomes more than a victim. He becomes a hero. Thanks for watching. I appreciate all the new people coming in from my last video. If you did miss my last video on the Justice Source, check it here. And if you're looking for something a little different, you can check out my Ninja Turtles video, where I explore seeing the Turtles as an adult versus how I saw as a kid. Subscribe and hit that like button. I always hated saying that, but it helps, and based on recent reactions, it helps to reach more good people like yourselves. But for now, and as always, take care and have an awesome day.